Have you ever smiled through a dinner you wanted to walk out of? Laughed off a joke that cut straight to your soul? Nodded politely when someone accidentally embarrassed you in front of everyone? Pretending you didn't feel the sting, that quiet pain of humiliation, of being the punchline, of being underestimated, is something too many of us carry silently. It doesn't start with a slap. It starts with a smirk, a sarcastic comment dressed in civility, a raised eyebrow that says, "Really, you?" A joke passed around the room like a drink, except you're the glass they're all sipping from. At first, you think it's you. Maybe you did say something awkward. Maybe you do come off too intense, too quiet, too confident, too different. You start analyzing every word you said, every movement you made, and then, somewhere between the overthinking and the forced smile, a question begins to burn inside you. Why me? Why do they choose me to target? Why do some people feel comfortable crossing the line, my line, and expect me to applaud them for it? That question lingers. It loops. It doesn't just hurt your ego. It chips away at your sense of worth. You replay the moment while brushing your teeth, while walking home, while lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if you should have said something, anything, instead of swallowing it whole. Let me say this clearly. It's not about you. That pain you feel, that burn in your chest, that knot in your stomach, that's not weakness. That's your dignity trying to speak up. What they see as a joke is often a calculated move. Subtle jabs are not always unintentional, and those who dish them out know exactly what they're doing. It's a performance for power, for dominance, for validation. But here's the twist. They don't really win. Because the dignity they try to strip from you is not theirs to take. Let me repeat that. They can't take what they didn't give. And this is where we pivot. This is where Stoicism enters the frame. Not as a philosophy you read about in a dusty book, but as a living, breathing armor you wear when the world tries to make you small. Stoicism is not about becoming emotionless. It's about choosing which emotions to nourish, and which ones to release like smoke from your lungs. It's about refusing to hand over your power to those who haven't earned it. You see, the Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, they weren't strangers to humiliation. They were emperors, slaves, and exiles. They knew what it was like to be mocked, manipulated, underestimated, but they also knew something else. That true power doesn't roar. It whispers. It's in the way you don't react. It's in the way you hold your gaze when someone tries to break you. It's in the decision to walk away with grace instead of staying and swinging. Now, let me tell you a story. There was a man I knew, quiet, soft-spoken, worked hard, never boasted. Every week, during team meetings, someone would find a way to cut him down. They'd laugh at his ideas, overlook his contributions, mispronounce his name deliberately. Most people in the room thought he was weak because he never fought back. But I watched him, really watched him. He never flinched, and in that stillness, there was a power they couldn't touch. Eventually, the project he built, quietly, patiently, brick by brick, became the company's backbone. And one day, when the loudest person in the room needed saving, guess whose help they had to ask for? Dignity isn't loud, it's not performative, it's not applause-worthy, it's a quiet strength that survives mockery, rejection, and betrayal. It's the storm inside you that no one sees, because you've learned to walk in the rain with your head high. That's what Stoicism teaches you, not how to be better than others, but how to be better than your worst impulses. Because let's be honest, when someone humiliates you, the first instinct is to strike back, to say something clever, sharp, devastating. You want them to feel as small as they made you feel. But that's not power, that's a reaction, and reactions are chains. Stoicism teaches you to pause, to observe, to choose. When you choose calm over chaos, you choose yourself. When you choose clarity over conflict, you reclaim your dignity. You don't need to match their energy. You need to master your own. That's what they don't expect. They expect you to flinch, to beg, to rage, to cry, because that makes them feel strong. But when you do none of that, when you stand in your silence, untouched, unimpressed, you become untouchable. I'm not telling you it's easy. I've failed this test more times than I'd like to admit. I've shouted when I should have stayed quiet. I've burned bridges just to prove a point, only to realize I was the one standing in the smoke. But each failure taught me something. That dignity isn't about how the world treats you. It's about how you treat yourself when no one's watching. Do you let the world tell you who you are? Or do you decide? Because if you don't define your worth, someone else will, and they'll base it on your weaknesses, not your strength. This is not about shrinking yourself into silence. It's about knowing when silence speaks louder than any comeback ever could. It's about knowing that not every insult needs a response. Not every battle needs to be fought. And not every person deserves front row seats to your emotions. So the next time someone tries to humiliate you, pause. Breathe. Remind yourself. This is about them, not me, because confident people don't humiliate others. Secure people don't cut down those around them. The ones who hurt you are often hurting themselves. They just don't know where to put it, so they throw it at you. But you don't have to catch it. You can let it fall. You can walk away with your head high, your heart intact, and your soul untouched. This isn't weakness, this is warrior-level composure. You've probably heard the quote, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." But Stoicism takes it one step further. No one can steal your dignity if you keep it rooted in principle. Your worth is not up for debate. It's not measured by applause, validation, or the lack of mockery. It is measured by how you carry yourself when the room turns against you. Let them laugh, let them joke, let them think they've won. You know the truth. They've only revealed who they are. And you're still standing, still calm, still whole. That's the kind of dignity they can't take. And if you've ever doubted yourself, if you've ever felt too soft, too quiet, too kind, know this. That's not a flaw. That's your edge. Because it takes real strength to stay kind in a cruel world. It takes real power to choose dignity over destruction. It takes a stoic heart to walk away from chaos without needing to explain yourself. And when you do that, when you rise without rage, when you protect your peace without permission, you become untouchable, not because the world stopped trying to break you, but because you stopped letting it. That, my friend, is the power they will never understand. That is the dignity they can't take. And that's what Stoicism has given me. Not perfection, but peace. Not revenge, but resilience. Not pride, but purpose. And once you taste that kind of clarity, no cheap shot, no sarcastic laugh, no passive-aggressive comment can ever touch you again. You don't need to prove anything, because you already are everything. They sense weakness like sharks sense blood, not with fangs bared or roars echoing, but with quiet calculation. They don't charge at you. No, they circle first. They watch. They nudge. They test. A comment here, a jab there, just enough to see if you'll flinch. And if you don't respond, if you stay silent not out of strength but out of discomfort, they smile. Because now they know, you're safe to push. You won't bite back. You won't set a boundary. You'll just take it. That's when the real game begins. I remember a job I once had, corporate, clean, beige walls and big promises. My manager, let's call him Alex, was the kind who never yelled. He didn't need to. He had a gift for slicing people down with sarcasm so smooth it passed as charm. He'd enter the room with a grin and leave it colder than when he came in. One day, during a weekly team meeting, he looked over at me and said, in front of everyone, "Well, maybe you'll actually get something done this week." Yeah, chuckles. Eyes shifting. Some people laughed because they thought it was funny. Others laughed because they didn't want to be the next target. And me, I forced a smile. That brittle, hollow kind of smile you give when you're trying to convince yourself it didn't sting. But it did, because it wasn't the first time. It was the 6th, or the 7th. Maybe more, and each time, it chipped away at my confidence, not just because of what was said, but because I didn't know how to respond. Do I defend myself and look petty? Do I laugh along and betray my own dignity? Or do I sit quietly and hope it passes? I chose silence, and that silence trained him. I wasn't someone he had to respect. I wasn't someone who'd push back. I was easy, and predators, yes, even the ones in blazers and polished shoes, don't leave easy targets alone. They feed off them, but something changed in me after that meeting. I didn't explode. I didn't confront him in some dramatic movie scene. What I did was far simpler and infinitely more powerful. I stopped reacting, not in a passive way, not in that shut down, crushed kind of silence. I mean real composure. When he made another sarcastic remark the next week, I didn't smile, I didn't laugh. I looked at him directly and said calmly, "If there's something you need to address, I'd prefer we do it professionally. No raised voice, no anger, just truth." He blinked, smirked, tried to play it off. But I watched something shift. For the first time, he didn't get the result he wanted. No laughter, no shame, just the quiet realization that I was no longer playing the game. That's when Stoicism clicked for me. I had read Marcus Aurelius before. You have power over your mind. Not outside events, but it never landed until that moment. Because real power isn't in how loudly you speak. It's in how deeply you believe you don't need to prove anything. They sense weakness when you don't believe in your worth. They sense strength when you do. This isn't about pretending not to care. That's just armor over insecurity. True composure, real Stoic strength, isn't cold detachment. It's calm awareness. It's the deep-rooted conviction that you don't owe anyone your peace. That you don't need to react to every insult like a puppet to a string. And people feel that. They feel when your silence is solid. They feel when your presence doesn't shift just because they tried to shake it. You stop being prey the moment you stop needing their validation. That doesn't mean you become arrogant. It means you become grounded. When you walk into a room knowing your value, people adjust. They stop testing your boundaries when they know they won't move. And if they don't stop, then you walk away, not because you're weak, but because you know your energy is too expensive for places where respect is treated like a luxury. The truth is, our hungry people don't actually want power. They want control over others. And when you show them you're not theirs to control, they lose interest because you no longer serve their insecurity. Think about it. How many times have you shrunk yourself to make others feel comfortable? How many times have you bitten your tongue when someone crossed a line? And how many of those people changed because of your silence? None, because silence doesn't always teach. Sometimes it enables. The Stoics understood this. They didn't believe in lashing out, but they did believe in boundaries, in self-respect, in not allowing external forces to shape your internal world. So the next time someone makes that joke at your expense, don't laugh to blend in. Don't smile to keep the peace. Let them sit in their discomfort. Let them feel the weight of their own words. Undistracted by your approval, you don't owe them grace they haven't earned. You owe yourself the dignity of truth. And that's what this is really about. Dignity. That quiet, unshakable dignity that doesn't beg, doesn't explain, doesn't apologize for existing. When you own that, they sense it. They stop, not because they've suddenly become kind, but because they realize you're not someone they can play with. They want control, not by force, but by erosion, not all at once, but piece by piece. And humiliation, that's their favorite tool. It's ancient, almost ritualistic, refined over centuries and disguised beneath layers of social nicety. It's not always loud, not always a spectacle. Sometimes it arrives dressed in civility, a perfectly timed interruption, a smirk just as you're about to speak, a subtle shake of the head while you're explaining an idea you worked all night on. These are not accidents. These are pressure points, pressed precisely to make you second-guess yourself. I remember one meeting, years ago. We were presenting quarterly strategies. I had rehearsed my part, polished the data, sharpened every slide. The room was full, executives, peers, eyes all around. I began my point, confident but measured, and then it happened. Mid-sentence, a colleague leaned forward and said, "Let's skip to the part that actually matters." Laughter followed, not loud, not cruel, but enough to cut the air, to shift attention away from me and toward him, enough to plant the seed that maybe what I had to say wasn't valuable. And in that moment, I froze, not because I didn't know my material, but because Shane has a way of making the mind go blank. My hands were steady, but my heart was racing, not from fear, but from restraint. The urge to shout, to defend, to retaliate, it boiled inside me. But I didn't, and not because I was weak, because I was beginning to understand something deeper. Their power isn't in what they say, it's in how you receive it. Their control only works if you believe the insult, if you carry it home with you, if you let it echo through your mind as you replay the moment over and over. But if you don't believe it, if you see it for what it is, a tactic, a performance, it loses its grip. That's the core of Stoicism. You don't get to control what others say or do, but you do get to control whether you let it define you. You get to choose your internal narrative, and in that moment, I reminded myself, his words were not truth. They were noise. His interruption said more about his insecurity than my competence. It was a move, a desperate one. You don't have to fight back to win. You just have to stand tall, not out of defiance, but out of clarity, out of the quiet conviction that no one, not a colleague, not a critic, not even your own inner doubt, gets to rewrite who you are. There's this quote I always return to, by Marcus Aurelius: "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That quote has saved me more times than I can count, because the world is loud, and people will say things to test you, mock you, diminish you, but that's not the danger. The real danger is when you start believing them. The colleague who undercuts you, he's not actually concerned about your ideas. He's concerned about your presence, about what it means if you shine. So he tries to dim the light, not because you're wrong, but because he's afraid of what your confidence reflects back at him. And if you understand that, you stop taking it personally. You stop shrinking. Humiliation, when seen clearly, is a mirror. It shows you more about the person using it than the person it's aimed at. But that takes practice. I've failed many times. There were moments I let people's opinions define me. Moments I walked out of rooms feeling smaller. Not because they broke me, but because I didn't yet know how to protect my sense of self. I mistook silence for strength. I confused swallowing pain with endurance. But Stoicism isn't about swallowing pain. It's about transforming it. You don't avoid confrontation by pretending it didn't hurt. You avoid control by choosing not to be ruled by it. Let me tell you what I've learned. When someone uses subtle humiliation, when they interrupt, when they laugh under their breath, when they question you with a smile, they're not just being rude. They're making a play for authority. They want to see if you'll fold. if you'll hesitate next time, if they can get into your head. And that's your cue, not to fight, but to anchor. Anchor in the truth of who you are, in the value of your work, in the fact that they don't get to narrate your worth. Because the moment you stop believing their version of you, the moment you reclaim the pen, they lose control. You walk into meetings not with armor, but with presence, not looking for validation, but owning your space. You speak not to impress, but to express. And if they interrupt again, you pause, you look at them, and you continue anyway, not louder, just firmer, with weight. There's something unnerving about someone who cannot be humiliated, not because they're numb, but because they're rooted. When you stand tall, not in anger, not in pride, but in peace, they don't know where to go. They can't feed off your reaction. They can't weaponize your hurt. And so they shrink, slowly, silently. The world respects conviction, not the loud kind, but the kind that doesn't waver. You don't have to raise your voice. You just have to know your value. And when you know it deeply, when it's stitched into every word, every silence, they feel it. And that's when the game ends. Not because they chose to stop, but because you did. Sometimes the hatred aimed at you has nothing to do with you. It isn't about your words, your tone, or even your actions. It's about your presence, something they can't explain but feel deep in their bones. You walk into the room carrying confidence they once dreamed of, radiating a quiet kind of strength they abandoned long ago. You live with authenticity, and that alone makes them uncomfortable. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because you remind them of everything they've stopped trying to become. They envy you, not openly. That would be too honest. Instead, their envy wears a mask. It shows up as sarcasm, as passive-aggressive remarks, as cold silence when you succeed. It shows up in the way they downplay your efforts, mock your enthusiasm, or act unimpressed when everyone else is inspired. And you wonder, what did I do to deserve this? Why do they seem to get pleasure when I stumble? The answer is darker than most want to admit. There's a word for it, schadenfreude. The twisted satisfaction some feel at the misfortune of others. But it goes deeper when envy takes root. When someone sees you flourishing in ways they feel they can't. Their mind doesn't default to admiration. It defaults to attack. Because tearing you down is easier than confronting the voice in their head whispering, "That could have been you. If only you hadn't given up." It's not always conscious. Sometimes it's subtle, but it's real. That smile when you mess up. That oddly timed critique after you achieve something meaningful. That coldness that wasn't there before you started rising. They want to bring you back down to their level, not because they hate you, but because your elevation reminds them they've settled. You become a mirror, and they don't like what they see. I've felt it before, more times than I can count. Times when people I trusted suddenly shifted the moment I started growing. When a friend went quiet the day I shared good news. When a coworker smiled to my face and laughed behind my back. When the applause I expected turned into awkward silence, and I couldn't figure out why. It took me years to stop blaming myself, To stop asking, was I too much, too confident, too proud? But the truth is, they were already drowning in their own comparisons before I even spoke. My voice was just the trigger, not the cause. Seneca said, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more. That is poor, and that craving, the one rooted in insecurity and comparison, it's a hunger that never ends. It makes people resentful, hollow, willing to celebrate someone's downfall just to feel full for a moment. But here's what I've learned. Their bitterness is not your burden. You don't have to carry their unresolved dreams on your shoulders. You don't have to shrink to fit into the comfort zones they've built around their disappointment. You don't have to apologize for being the version of yourself they chose not to become. That's where your real power begins. When you understand the psychology behind their malice, it stops feeling personal. You stop internalizing every jab. You stop overanalyzing every cold glance. You stop giving weight to voices that are only loud because they've been silenced by their own fear. Let them talk. Let them project. Let them sneer and scoff and pretend they don't see your growth. You don't need their validation, because their envy only confirms what you already know. You're on a path they abandoned. You're doing the work. You're showing up fully. You're refusing to wear a mask just to make them comfortable. And the irony, you're not even trying to threaten them. You're just being you. But in a world where many have traded truth for approval, authenticity becomes revolutionary. It exposes the fragile. It intimidates the inauthentic. And sometimes, it gets punished. Not because it deserves punishment, but because it's too real for those who have buried their realness. I won't lie, it hurts. Being the target of envy feels isolating. Especially when it comes from people you care about. Especially when you realize they'd rather see you stumble than rise. But you cannot dim your light to soothe their shadows. You can't dull your edge to make them feel safe. And you sure as hell can't let their bitterness dictate your narrative. Stand firm, not in defiance, but in peace. Smile, not to hide the pain, but to show them they didn't break you. Keep rising, not to prove them wrong, but because you've already proven to yourself that you belong here. When they try to humiliate you, remember, it's never really about the moment. It's about what you represent. The courage to be seen. The strength to be disliked. The will to keep going when others stopped. You're not the villain in their story. You're just the evidence that they could have chosen differently. And once you see that, really see it, their power dissolves. You stop carrying their envy like it belongs to you. You stop shrinking under the weight of their insecurity. You stop asking, why do they hate me? And start realizing they're just not at peace with themselves. And that's not your war to fight. You've got better places to go. They don't need to scream to cross your line. They just need to know you won't say a word when they step over it. That's how it starts, quietly. A comment that makes you uncomfortable. A joke that lands wrong. A request that asks too much. You pause. You hesitate. You think, it's not a big deal. But what you don't say becomes what they assume. And what they assume becomes how they treat you. Boundaries aren't broken all at once, they erode, slowly, with your silence. If you don't clearly define what's acceptable, they'll define it for you, and they won't do it in your favor. People will always test the limits, not because they're evil, but because they're human. Some will push just to see how far they can go. And if you don't draw the line, they'll redraw it closer and closer to your core until you look in the mirror and don't recognize the version of you that's still trying to please them. I've been there, more than I care to admit, letting things slide, brushing it off, thinking I was choosing peace by avoiding conflict. But I wasn't choosing peace. I was choosing discomfort that looked polite. I was choosing their comfort over my own integrity. And let me tell you, that cost more than any argument ever would. Disrespect rarely enters like a storm. It tiptoes in through an open door. The door you left cracked because you didn't want to seem difficult. Because you didn't want to be seen as emotional, demanding, too much. But here's what I've learned. Not setting boundaries doesn't make you kind. It makes you resentful, and over time, that resentment builds into quiet bitterness. You start folding yourself smaller to fit their expectations. You begin performing instead of living. Oprah was once told she wasn't right for television, that she didn't have the look, the voice, the control. But instead of changing who she was to be acceptable, she leaned deeper into who she truly was. That refusal to bend made her a force. Had she accepted their version of enough, the world would have never seen the version of her that changed lives. She drew her own line, and then stood behind it with her whole self. That's the power of boundaries. They're not walls to keep people out. They're fences with gates, and you hold the key. You decide who enters, how long they stay, and what kind of energy they bring with them. If they don't respect your space, they don't get access to it. It's that simple, but it isn't easy. Setting boundaries often costs you approval. People get uncomfortable when you stop being easy to manipulate. They call you cold when you become unavailable to their convenience. They call you arrogant when you stop justifying your needs. But here's the paradox. The more you're okay with being misunderstood, the more peace you earn. Epictetus said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish." And that quote lives in me now, because boundaries will always make someone uncomfortable, but that someone should never be you. The discomfort of others is not your burden to carry, especially when the weight is their own lack of respect for limits. I've lost people because of boundaries. Friends who were only around when I was endlessly available. Colleagues who thrived when I said yes but pulled back the moment I said no. At first, it hurt. I questioned myself, wondered if I was becoming selfish. But eventually, I realized, losing people who don't respect your boundaries isn't a loss. It's a revelation. Because the people who truly care about you won't just tolerate your boundaries, they'll honor them. They'll see your no, not as rejection but as a sign of your self-respect. And if someone can't handle you choosing yourself, they were never choosing you to begin with. They were choosing what you gave them. And the moment you stop giving, they stop showing up. So no, you don't set boundaries so others will like you. You set them because you like yourself. You set them because you finally understand your time, your energy, your mental clarity. They're not renewable in infinite amounts, and every time you give those away without intention, you're saying yes to someone else's comfort and no to your own well-being. The shift is subtle, but it's profound. You stop being drained by people who take without giving. You stop explaining your worth. You stop negotiating your standards like they're up for debate. You become centered, calm, and perhaps most importantly, you become dangerous to those who relied on your silence to get what they wanted. There's strength in the pause before the yes. There's power in the quiet, firm no, and there's real freedom in the space you reclaim when you stop apologizing for needing space at all. If they walk away because you asked for respect, let them. That's not rejection, that's redirection, toward relationships that are reciprocal, toward environments where you don't have to shrink, toward a life where you are the author of your limits, not the victim of someone else's entitlement. You can't change people's reactions to your boundaries, but you can change whether or not you betray yourself to keep the peace. Because peace that costs your voice isn't peace. It's self-abandonment dressed in politeness. Choose better. Choose you. Set the line, and stand behind it. Not with anger, not with ego, but with the quiet certainty that your value is not negotiable. And anyone who needs you to lower your standards to earn their love was never offering love in the first place. They were offering convenience, and you deserve more than that. You deserve respect that doesn't require translation. You deserve space that feels safe. You deserve to live unedited, unshrinking, unafraid. So draw the line, and don't move it for anyone who wouldn't do the same for you. They don't just want to hurt you, they want others to see it. They want the humiliation to echo, because for cruelty to feel complete, it needs an audience. Without witnesses, it's just meanness in the dark. But with eyes watching, with heads turning and lips smirking, it becomes something else entirely. A performance, a power play. They don't seek justice or truth or correction. They seek dominance, validated by the crowd. It's never just about you. It's about the theater they build around you. You're cast as the fool, the outsider, the one who doesn't belong, not because it's true, but because that's the role they need you to play to feel strong themselves. And when the crowd laughs, stays silent, looks away, that's when it hits the hardest. Because suddenly, it's not just one person's cruelty, it's a chorus of indifference. And you feel it, deep, the sting of isolation wrapped in noise. But here's what Stoicism teaches us, and what I had to learn the hard way. Their stage is not your reality. Their applause, their silence, their smirks, none of it defines you unless you let it. The opinion of the crowd only has weight if you hand it to them. And if you don't, if you stand tall in the silence, in the discomfort, in the solitude, that's when your real power starts to rise. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them know anything about the subject." And the subject here is you. They don't know what you've overcome. They don't know the nights you fought your own demons just to show up. They don't know the restraint it takes to remain calm when mocked. The strength it takes to keep speaking truth when your voice trembles. They don't know the cost of your courage, and yet, they judge. They whisper. They giggle in the corner or stare in silence. Complicit, not because you deserve it, but because it's easier to follow the loudest voice in the room than to stand beside the quiet one who's being targeted. But listen, real power doesn't need applause. Real conviction doesn't beg for agreement. And real dignity, it shows up when the room turns cold, when the crowd turns away, and you still choose not to shrink, because you weren't standing for them to begin with. I've been there. I've been the one standing alone, surrounded by people who were too afraid or too entertained to say something. And I won't lie, it hurt. Not just the cruelty itself, but the realization that so many would rather watch than walk beside you. But over time, that pain became a kind of purification. It stripped away the illusion that approval equals worth. It burned away the false belief that silence from others means something's wrong with you. Because here's the truth. Most people are terrified of isolation, so they follow the crowd, even when the crowd is wrong, even when the crowd is cruel. They laugh to fit in. They stay quiet to avoid becoming the next target. It's not always malicious, it's weak. And once you see that, once you understand that cowardice wears many masks, their laughter stops sounding like truth. It starts sounding like fear. And your fear, it becomes focus. You don't owe the crowd your defense. You don't owe them your dignity, your explanation, or your emotional unraveling. You owe yourself your presence, your truth, your stillness. Because the storm outside only wins when you let it inside. The Stoic path isn't glamorous. It's not designed for approval. It's designed for inner peace. It's for those willing to walk alone rather than kneel in a crowd. It's for those who understand that solitude can be sacred when your values are intact. That being misunderstood is a small price to pay for being authentic. Standing tall when no one claps is not easy. It will test every part of you, but it's in that test that you find the unshakable parts of your soul. The parts no crowd can define, no mockery can touch, and the irony, the ones who mocked you today will one day remember you as the one who didn't flinch, the one who didn't perform, the one who walked through the fire without ever lowering their head. Let them seek an audience. Let them perform. Let them confuse cruelty with cleverness. You stay still. You stay real. You keep your back straight and your eyes clear, not because they deserve your strength, but because you do. And when the noise fades, when the crowd moves on, when the spotlight shifts, they'll forget what they said, but they won't forget how you stood, unapologetic, unbroken, unshaken. That's the kind of presence that outlasts the moment. That's Stoic power. The deepest wound isn't the words they throw or the laughter they weaponize. It's the doubt that creeps in when you wonder if maybe, just maybe, they're right. That's the fracture they aim for. Not your skills, not your actions, but your identity. Because when you don't fully know who you are, the world wastes no time trying to tell you, and it rarely tells you the truth. Instead, it projects its fears, its envy, its own confusion, until you start carrying those things like they're yours. That's how humiliation becomes effective, not because it's accurate, but because it finds a crack, a moment where you're unsure, a gap in your belief about your worth. They don't need to shout, they just need to hint. They sense it, not in your body, not in your tone, but in your center. Identity weakness, not knowing, not owning, not standing firm in who you are. That's what gives them access. I've felt it, that silence after someone said something cruel, and instead of brushing it off, I absorbed it, not because I believed them at first, but because I wasn't sure what I believed about myself. Their insult stung not because it was sharp, but because I was soft in that place, unformed, undefined, and so I spent years trying to earn value in the eyes of others, mistaking applause for identity, approval for self-worth. But applause fades, praise turns, and if your identity is built on the reaction of the world, you'll spend your whole life chasing a version of yourself that only exists in the eyes of others. That's why Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Freedom isn't about external control. It's about internal command, about knowing who you are when no one is watching, and standing by it when everyone is. Look at Eleanor Roosevelt, born into wealth, yes, but not into love, not into respect. Her own mother called her Granny because she thought she was too plain. She was ridiculed for her looks, her voice, her presence. Even those closest to her tried to define her small. But here's the thing, they failed. Not because they stopped trying, but because she stopped listening. She didn't erase their voices. She rose above them. She forged herself from clarity, from values, from a quiet decision. They don't get to define me anymore. And that decision changes everything. Because when you master yourself, the insults don't land, they bounce, they dissolve. People can try to humiliate you, but it won't stick, because there's nowhere inside you for it to hold on. That's the shift, not silence, not suppression, but solidness. A foundation built not on how others see you, but on how you see yourself. I used to crave praise. It felt like air, like without it, I couldn't breathe. And when someone criticized me, it crushed me, not because I respected them, but because I hadn't yet anchored myself in something deeper than opinions. But the day I began to build that foundation, brick by brick, belief by belief, everything changed. I stopped reacting. I started choosing. I stopped performing. I started becoming. And you don't get there by pretending you're unbothered. You get there by asking the hard questions. Who am I? What do I value? What do I believe about myself, even when the world disagrees? That's the Stoic path, not detachment, but definition, not indifference, but independence of identity. People will always have opinions. Some will lift you, some will break you, but none of them matter if you're already whole. That's true Stoic power. Not needing the insult to sting, not needing the praise to heal, because you've already done the work inside. And this isn't ego, this isn't arrogance, it's the quiet dignity of someone who's come home to themselves, who no longer looks outward for permission to exist, who no longer asks the world to fill the hole only they can fill. It's a clarity that cannot be faked and cannot be shaken. So when someone mocks you, you don't flinch. When someone excludes you, you don't crumble. When someone questions you, you don't start questioning yourself. Because you've been through the fire, and you've forged a name no one gets to rewrite. And the irony, the stronger you become in yourself, the less you feel the need to prove it. You don't argue, you don't explain, you don't chase validation, you just live. You walk through the room with calmness, you speak without defending, you laugh without asking for permission. That's when the jokes fall flat, that's when the cruel comments echo in silence. Because their power relied on your doubt, and your doubt is gone. This is not about perfection. This is not about becoming untouchable. It's about becoming unshakable, rooted, real. And when that happens, something incredible unfolds. Your energy changes. People feel it. Some will be drawn to it. Others will be threatened by it. But none of them will control it. You are not here to be approved. You are here to be aligned. And when you finally know your worth, not even 1,000 voices in the crowd can take it from you. Because it's not out there. It never was. It's in you, waiting to be claimed. And once it is, no one else gets a vote. There will always be people who try to humiliate you. It won't always be obvious. Sometimes it's a subtle smirk, a backhanded compliment, a moment of silence when you speak, or laughter that wasn't meant to be kind. Some will envy you because you remind them of what they gave up on. Others will test you, hoping you'll crack just enough for them to feel strong again. And some will do it for no reason at all, except they don't know how to handle your presence, your clarity, your light. But let me say something you might need to hear right now. You are not here to shrink. Not for their comfort, not for their approval, not for the illusion of safety that comes from staying small. You've done that already. You've tried making yourself quieter so others didn't feel threatened. You've held your brilliance back so no one would call you arrogant. You've stayed still so the ones who couldn't move forward wouldn't feel left behind. And where did it get you? Respected? Protected? No. Just hidden, forgotten, even by yourself. That ends now. You don't beg for respect. You command it, not through arrogance, not through noise, but through alignment, through the quiet certainty that you don't need to explain why you deserve dignity. You just do, not because you're perfect, not because everyone agrees, but because you're human, because you're enough, because you've decided that your worth is no longer up for public debate. And the moment you decide that, everything changes. You stop responding to bait. You stop explaining your silence, your choices, your growth. You stop trying to win every moment of disrespect. Because the goal isn't to win every battle. The goal is to never hand over your power. Not even for a second. Because once you give them the ability to shape how you feel about yourself, You give them the steering wheel to your soul. And that's not a gift you should give lightly. There's this idea people carry, especially good, kind people, that if you're strong, you'll always speak up, that if you're confident, you'll confront every insult. But Stoicism teaches something different. It teaches the power of restraint, of choosing your battles, of understanding that your peace is more valuable than their attention. Sometimes the most powerful move isn't fighting back, it's refusing to react. It's keeping your dignity so intact that no amount of noise outside can disturb the silence inside. And here's where I speak from experience. I've handed over my power before. I've let someone else's words wreck my day, my confidence, my identity. I've mistaken my silence for weakness, when really, it was wisdom waiting to wake up. I used to think I had to prove myself to be taken seriously. But the more I leaned into Stoicism, the more I saw the truth. You don't have to prove what's already true. You just have to live it. Let them talk. Let them twist your words. Let them misunderstand your calm for coldness. You're not here to perform. You're here to embody. To walk into rooms without needing applause. To say no without guilt. To draw lines and not explain them. That's real power. That's unshakable dignity. Because when you live from your center, when your worth is anchored in who you are and not how they react, you become untouchable. And not in the way that walls you off, but in the way that radiates something they can't manipulate. That's what shakes them, not your strength, but your steadiness, your refusal to be pulled into games you've outgrown. And if you're watching this right now, maybe you've forgotten your power. Maybe you've let someone else's voice get too loud inside your head. Maybe you've started believing you're only valuable when others say so. I'm here to remind you, that's a lie. You're valuable because you exist. Because you've survived things no one even knows about. Because you've kept showing up when it would have been easier to disappear. It's time to take your dignity back. Not in anger, in alignment, not with vengeance, with vision. You don't need to match their cruelty. You just need to stop accepting it. You don't need to scream to be heard. You just need to speak like someone who knows their voice matters. That's what Stoicism gives you, the ability to stand tall when the room is cold, to keep your eyes forward when they try to pull you down, to choose peace, not because you're weak, but because you're finally strong enough not to chase chaos. So from this moment forward, claim your dignity, not tomorrow, not when they change. Not when you feel more ready, right now, because the truth is, you were never broken, you were just waiting for permission, and I promise you, you don't need it. This is your permission, to stop shrinking, to stop explaining, to stop performing for a crowd that doesn't even know the depth of your story. Stand tall. Speak little, move boldly, and if they don't understand it, good. That means you're no longer operating at their level. You're rising, you're becoming untouchable. If this hit home, if something in your heart said, finally, then comment below. I claim my dignity. Say it loud, say it for you. Say it because the world needs more people who've remembered who they are. Now go live it.